but I'm going to record it anyway. So if you have any issue with recording, now is the time to bail. But yeah, so it's all the guff that you missed at the start. But we'll be recording, just so you know, we'll be recording all three. And this is our first. So if you needed any of the beginning, you'll get it in the next one, because I'll be saying the same thing, much the same thing. Yeah, so I want to make that point. I want to make that point quite strongly. The parents we represent have no obligation. You can go mad. You can do exactly what you want. You can do whatever you want to do and what you need to do as a parent, okay? However, Genspect are going to be watching their reputation, making sure that what they say is appropriate, making sure that they position themselves in the exact way that they want to position themselves, because you have to be very careful with your words. It's very easy to get your words misrepresented if you don't choose your words carefully. And I've been doing it obviously since 2017, so I'm really quite weathered. My mother is staying with me at the moment, and she took me aside today because she knew this was happening. She said, you know, people might come after you for this. And I says, what do you mean? She goes, well, you know, there's some activists, and I hear they could be quite difficult, you know. And do you not know I did a film?
Stella, I'm going to interrupt you and say the wonderful Sasha Ayad has joined us. Will I let her in? Because we're at a break in the presentation.
One and only. So, yes.
Somebody else has beat me to it. She's in.
Sorry, it was me. Apologies. Stole your thunder there.
So will we put Sasha? Where's Sasha?
There are so many people. This is amazing.
Hello, Sasha. There she is, the one and only. I wonder, is there a way, Joe, that you'd be able to kind of put a screen on me and Sasha, put some sort of point? I think it's called a point. Do you follow me? Here, I'll do it.
Spotlight.
Pin.
Okay.
And then
thank you.
You have to pin Sasha as well. Go on to it. Good to see you, Sasha. We've just started a few minutes ago. Yeah.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay?
Hang on, I'm going to try and pin you. Is she pinned as well?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Hi, Sasha. How are you?
Hello, great. How is everybody?
Yeah.
Good. We've got loads. We've got 160, and it's still coming.
Oh my goodness, that's incredible.
It's good,
I would like it so that we could see me and Sasha together. I'm sure people want to see Sasha more than me.
Hold on. It says you are, I think. Oh, there we are.
Oh,
it is for me.
Side by side.
Yeah, I see you both.
Good.
It's good.
Oh, good. So, Sasha, it'll be like Gender a Wider Lens.
Well, it's like Gender a Wider Lens.
In front of a live audience.
Except this time I'm asking you the questions, I believe. So now it's my go. Okay. So this is the idea of walking the high wire. So it's one of those metaphors. You keep hearing the same metaphors. The metaphors of vehicle collision, hit by a bus, and then you also hear the high wire. Why is it? And I want both of you, because I want to make you disagree, because it's always interesting when people disagree, but this one will probably be quite obvious. Why do people keep coming back to this high wire? Whoever wants to go first.
I'll let Sasha.
Okay. I mean, I think there's so many layers of why it's high wire. I mean, the first one that comes to my mind is that, and we talk about this on the podcast all the time, it is developmentally appropriate and normal for young people to be exploring all kinds of counterculture identities. So when parents have caution about this or want to take it slow, that already puts them in conflict with their kid, which is actually a kind of a normal place to be when you're parenting a teenager. But what makes it particularly tricky, and I think all the parents here will know, is that our culture has really taken a very literal interpretation of what it means now when a young person is questioning their identity. And it becomes this sense of urgency to actually concretize it and make it true and call them the name and change the wardrobe. And so what used to be in other kinds of examples, a bit of a tension between parents and child, who maybe the child is listening to some kind of death metal with really disturbing messages and dressing in all black and do it, and the parents might roll their eyes and say, you know, you should get back to your positive hobbies. this is a very different tension now because the entire culture has rallied behind the child's identity and is taking it very literally. So parents feel like they're a single voice amongst a sea of literal affirmation. And I think for that reason, the normal safeguarding that a parent might try to do, like pumping the brakes or encouraging their kid to engage in other activities, it has an extra set of challenges and stressors and tension on that normal parenting kind of safeguarding. So I don't know if Stella and I will disagree about this, but that's what comes to mind for me.
I'll find something to make you disagree. There'll be something, but maybe not this. Stella, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I really understand that, high wire, because the feeling is, I remember actually talking to Lisa Marciano about it way back when I first met her. And she said, the stakes are too high. The feeling of the parents think, yeah, you know, we've all read for, you know, parents have watched their children go through different identities, and it's perfectly natural and normal to go through different identities, especially between the ages of 12 and 25. And parents have watched askance and aghast, going, oh my God, look at the state of them, look what they're doing, and they're hanging out with awful people and they're doing awful things, and it's very scary. That's been happening for millennia. But this particular movement is leading to medical, lifelong, irreversible decisions. And so you feel like you're on a high wire because you can't just go, well, it's a phase. The phrase it's a phase doesn't cut it, because it's like, oh my God, if they carry this out, the stakes are too high. It's too awful. If it's gone wrong, it's too awful. And that's where you go back to that lovely phrase, hasten slowly. When somebody is making a very big decision, you go slowly, you don't go fast. And the thing, and Lisa Lippman, I'm delighted to see us here, and she's very welcome to make any comment or message she wants in the chat. But when she named it, it was so well named, rapid onset gender dysphoria. What we're mostly fixated upon, as I find with the parents, it is so fast, and so many parents don't take it seriously because it's so fast that they think this has come in at like a rocket. This has come in at such a pace that it couldn't be real. They're evidently gone a bit mad. They're evidently gone into something, and they'll come out of it as fast. And it's like, no, it goes really, really fast. It goes really, really hard, and it lingers. It stays. And that's really, really frightening. And that's where the tightrope or walk of the high wire feels like. You feel like, oh my God, if we drop, if the kid goes wrong, if we get this wrong, it's so horrifying that parents aren't sleeping at night, and parents are just in a wretched state, looking around online at so much kind of, who do I trust? Where do I go? And they come into our meetings, our support meetings with the GDSN, and they look like somebody who's come out of a shipwreck. They look like they've come out of an awfully frightening place, and they're so isolated. On this high wire, they're so isolated. It's such a frightening place to be. And one thing I think that I'd like to hear you talk about, Sasha, because I've heard you talk about before, and I think it's really interesting, is the parental engagement. You said in one of our wider lens things, you said they come in either like a SWAT team or else they ignore it. And, you know, we're, of course, therapists, and we're going to talk about the famous middle ground. But could you talk a little bit about that? Because I think parents find that the most hard, and I can see why, because it's so, so difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And, you know, as I do this work, I'm constantly becoming aware of populations of families who might also be dealing with this in a very different way. So, I mean, one thing that I think is important to keep in mind is that by definition, Stella, the people who contact us are in a particular place. First of all, they know they need extra help because they're not sure how to handle it on their own. That's why they're contacting a therapist. And most of them are pretty nervous. Maybe they experienced a few months of, this is fine, they'll grow out of it, but maybe the identity has stuck and it's getting more intense, or maybe the child's making bigger demands. So parents usually contact us when they're in a place of either starting to really panic, or perhaps they've gone online and read about ROGD, or maybe they've read about how easily young people can start embarking on a transition medical process, and they start to really get nervous. So I think that's important to keep in mind. And I'll share just a little anecdote from my life. A dear friend of mine who is got a lot going on in her life. She has 3 children, and her oldest daughter recently started saying things like, Mom, I think I'd like to use they, them pronouns or something like that. And this friend of mine, she didn't really do any research about it. She knows about the work I do, but this is not something that's on her mind. And she sat her daughter down and asked her a bunch of very specific questions. She said, do you think you're not a girl? Do you think your body is not a girl's body? And why would you want me to use different pronouns with you if you don't think that you're really a man or whatever? I think the child asked for he, him pronouns. Anyway, my friend said, okay, well, I mean, if this is something you're exploring, I'll do my best. And I told this story to Stella, and she turned it into a very lighthearted exercise. And the rest of the day, she was telling her daughter, hey, dude, come down for dinner, or bro, do you want to go shopping? And she turned it into almost a bit of a farce. And they have an incredibly close relationship. Daughter's still not at that I hate you mom teenage phase at all yet. And so daughter kind of laughed it off, and she felt a little embarrassed. And then a few days later, she was on to some other identity. So I raise this because it's very interesting to hear.
Hang on, just one sec. Somebody's speaker is making.
I know, I've muted it.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah. Carry on, Sasha.
So I say this just because my guess is that for some families, for whatever reason, this identity thing comes and then it goes. And I don't know what the ingredients are for that specific situation. But we are working with families who, perhaps due to their child's distress, so I'm still hearing a lot of noise.
Just yeah, I think it was somebody with a speaker problem. I just ejected them.
Okay.
So
we are dealing with families who perhaps their children were under a significant amount of distress before the identity came up, or perhaps due to whatever factors in the child's life, they've gotten really deep into it. But I think parental engagement is important precisely because of the kind of anxiety that does come up in the family around this. And so I have kind of noticed and identified at least the people who contact me tend to fall into these different categories. So there is the SWAT team family who immediately rushes in and tries to cut off all social media, monitor everything that the child is doing, and we're never speaking of this gender thing, this is not happening. And you know, there are times I think when some of that can be appropriate. So I don't mean to say that if some family has done that, it's necessarily the wrong thing. But that's kind of in contrast with the type of family who thinks, you know, this kid needs to completely work this out on their own. We're just not going to talk about it. I'm very nervous to talk about it. I don't want to say the wrong thing. And so we're just not having that discussion. And then there are other families who kind of waffle back and forth, particularly parents, usually the mom, between I don't want to harm my child by denying that they're going through this. And so they might kind of give in and like agree to all the pronouns and agree to all the things. And then when they start to do their research or learn a little bit more about the medical transition, they get scared and try to backtrack and have to walk back what they've done. So these are kind of the 3 general buckets that I see in terms of how families respond. And
can I jump in and ask a question, because it fits right in with this that somebody's asked. So what does it look like? Can you engage too much? And what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, what comes up for me is the issue of privacy in teenagehood. And I think it is very important that kids still have some sense of creating like a space for their own thoughts, their own ideas, their own exploration to flourish. I think there can be too much engagement. I think sometimes families might, their impulse might be, we'll just never let the child be alone. So for example, if there's a child who's dealing with really depressing thoughts or thoughts of self-harm, or perhaps they have been actively self-harming, I've seen some families just try to take away that child's privacy altogether. Like, we're never going to leave them alone. We're going to have our eyes on them all the time. And I don't think that's quite the right approach either, because kids still need to figure out how to self-manage. And this is a tricky topic because they don't have the ability to self-manage yet. I mean, that's particularly why they don't have the emotional regulation skills and they are kind of all over the place. But I think it's important for families to realize you still have to give them a sense of, that teenage angst and teenage struggle that is usually temporary. Stella, you've talked about this a bit on the podcast. The hardest thing for a parent is knowing your child's unhappy and you want to jump in and do whatever you can. And so if that means spending all the time together or making sure they never feel sad, or don't let them sit with their journal because they might write about depressing things, I think it comes from a really good place. But I do think young people need some sense of autonomy. So when I think about engagement, I think about being able to have, warm, loving, curious conversations with your child. I don't necessarily mean being side by side with your child all the time. And I think when it comes to privacy, it's hard these days because that usually involves a kid alone on their phone and on social media. But I think there are probably other ways to honor a young person's privacy and autonomy. Like, for example, giving them the freedom to go spend time with their friends without tracking them on their phone, on the GPS function of their phone. Or, trusting that if the child is hanging out with certain kids that, they might get into some sort of trouble, but it's not going to be completely detrimental. So kind of loosening the leash a little bit also has to happen at the same time as the engagement. So engagement is not just about spending a lot of time together. It's about the depth and quality of the time that you do spend with the kid. So I hope that's helpful.
I do think as well, it reminds me of, well, because I'm a parent, I know how much our children absorb us. And my own kid was away for a few days and it's like she was just pounding in my head. Is she okay? Is she okay? Is she okay? No matter what I was doing. So it's very, very, very easy to slip into over engagement. And I do it myself all the time. And we swing wildly, I think, as parents from under engagement and over engagement because we're constantly trying to get it right, like an artist trying to get the sculpture right. And we can't quite leave it alone. But I think you can kind of remember that sometimes disengaging is the right thing to do in the hour, if you follow me. Wu Wai, you know that concept in Chinese kind of Confucius kind of thinking, which is the art of knowing when to do nothing, the art of inaction, the art of knowing, I say nothing here, I back off, I retreat. That is where we need to find our wisdom, I think, with that. Sometimes it's better off to kind of actually not comment, to say nothing, to say less. Very, very difficult. And as somebody's just said in the chat, and on top of that, not only do you sometimes need to know when to do nothing, but also you have to look after yourself. Because as fast as this comes in, it seems to linger for a long time. And I remember asking you, Sasha, a long time ago, and it's stuck in my mind ever since. I said, kind of, what's your average time for a client with gender? Because you've been seeing children, teenagers, with really what you could describe as mostly rapid onset gender dysphoria. As far as I can gather, that's been your client base since 2015. And as far as I know, you spent a long time with the client. It lingers for a long time. Am I right?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I've worked with some young people since 2016, and just now they're starting to reveal really, really important pieces of their story that have no doubt have a relationship to their gender distress. So I think it does take a long time. And again, I think this has to do with the personality of the young person. Some kids are so guarded and they're so insecure, and it takes a long time for them to open up. Whereas some other kids I've been able to work with for, a shorter period of time and they move on and everything is great. So it's not always the case that this is such a long drawn out process, but I think the more complicated the young person is, the longer it takes to really try and narrow down what are the core issues, what are the contributing issues.
Can I jump in with another question here? Somebody's asked this in the chat. What do you do when parents disagree. I mean, the obvious one is when one parent wants to affirm the identity and the other one strongly doesn't, but there can be other iterations of that disagreement. There can be wanting the same goal, but having very different pathways to get there. How do you walk? Because then you're walking two high wires, right? You're walking the one with your kid and then you're walking the one with your spouse. How do you do that?
You know, what I try to do is, well, I don't do family therapy. So I consult with families of the young people on my caseload, but I don't do family therapy. A lot of families I work with actually end up going into family therapy and working on those issues with another therapist. In those cases, I am in communication with the other therapist just to consult and kind of talk about common denominator issues that we think are important. But maybe Stella can answer that since you work more with parents.
Yeah. Well, I work with parents because I facilitate at meetings at the GDSN, and they're parent-based kind of children who've been impacted, parents of children who've been impacted by gender dysphoria and gender issues. And, you know, I feel one thing is really important is that I want to say this can wreck marriages, and to be very, very careful of your marriage, because it can wreck marriages. It's so maddening and disorientating. And as Angus said, and if you have any questions, just leave them into Angus in a private message to Angus. But it can be so disorientating. And if you disagree with the stakes being so high, you can go to war. You can say, you're wrong, and I will fight you because this is about our child's safety. This is about our child's. So it can get very vicious and I can see why. I can see why the stakes are so high. I can see why both parents are willing to really fight their corner, because they think, not because they're being egocentric, but because they honestly think this is the most important thing for the safety of our child. The second thing is an extraordinary development that's happened over the hundreds of meetings we've had with the GDSN. We started last April. So what are we, 14 months going or something like that, and a few meetings every week. And the stats are showing 95% of the meetings are mothers. And that's kind of astonishing. Now, I do know that a lot of husbands would maybe shy away from group meetings. I do get that, but 95% is such an astronomical figure. I can't help but think this might be more to do with something to do with maleness and sexuality, and kind of there might be some sort of response to this, that I think there might be things impacting the man in this scenario with gender that we haven't really thought about, we haven't examined. Maybe Lisa Lippman will do a great study on this. I just think there might be something going on there that us women haven't really figured out, because the numbers are so startling. For me, with now, I know the parents go for the family therapy and stuff like that, but they're not looking for support for themselves. I don't know. I just think it's an interesting figure. And the second thing I'd like to point out, because I've noticed it, and I've noticed it quite a few times, a few of the parents whose kids have desisted have pointed out that they gave the mothers were the project manager, and they gave the dads very active roles in, you bring them to baseball, or you bring them out camping or fishing or on road trips. They were very specific of it. Do you follow me? They gave specific plans to involve the family and the parents. Now, I'm never usually at all patronizing about men, and I think father's role is incredibly important. It's just a stat that I didn't expect, and I thought that needs examination. No more than the figures of gender issues arising in families. Why would there be so many with the men? I don't know. So that was my thoughts on that.
I just want to say, I've just been looking at the number of people. We've got Still Tish, brilliant Still Tish. Yeah. We've got Will Malone. We've got Lisa Lippman, as you correctly say. We've got Aaron Kimberley, who's our very own.
He's in Genspect.
We've got a politician from Norway who's talked about how many heartbreaking stories are already in the chat. What's happened, I think, this year is that I don't know whether you'll agree with this, it does feel to me like there's a little bit of a change in the air. You hesitate to say it, I hesitate to say it. it strikes me as obvious that if there are more people interested in this who aren't going through it, that is by definition going to support parents. Is that something you've seen? Should I not be saying it out loud? Should I be touching wood?
You go ahead, Sasha, and I'll answer after you. You go ahead.
I agree 100%. I mean, just to correct you, Stella, 2016 is when I started this practice, but around 2016, 2017, nobody knew anything about this unless they were the parent of a child going through this. And now I see more and more people have become aware of what's going on, or they have a neighbor whose kid is going through this, so I do agree completely that there are more people taking interest in the topic. And I have seen personally, when somebody starts to look into this issue, they almost can't look away because it's so shocking. I mean, it's shocking what's happening to families. It's shocking how quickly kids are being affirmed by psychiatrists and doctors. I mean, everything about this is very shocking. So I think you're right. I do think there's been a shift. And I'm curious, Stella, if you have observed that too.
I think there's been an extraordinary shift. And I think we are now, as I said at the beginning of this, before you come in, Sasha, we're in a movement now. There's thousands of parents, and we're kind of launching Genspect tonight on the foot of the thousands of parents who are all unhappy, all singing the same song. They're all saying, we're unhappy with the treatment our children are receiving for their gender issues. Now, when thousands of parents are saying this, and these are involved, engaged, decent parents who've been all over the school reports, who've been all over the parenting, who are good parents. And that's one thing I really want to say to the parents here tonight, because so many of the parents feel that my kid is so distressed, I must have got it all wrong. And, you know, that doesn't necessarily follow. That doesn't, if you look at, and Sasha's very good on this, but like if you look at the other medical scandals that have happened in the past, and I think we are in the middle of uncovering a medical scandal. I think an awful lot of children are receiving inappropriate care, and I think we will uncover it, and we're in the process of uncovering it. And I think tonight is a very important night in this process. And when you look at these parents who are involved, they're good parents. I didn't know when I was going to see all these numbers of parents in the GDSN meetings, I didn't know how good the parents were going to be, but it emerged over time. Like, these are good, loving, decent parents. And yeah, every one of us have massive flaws, and you could absolutely easily analyze every one of the parents and say, this is what you did wrong and this is what you did wrong. And I'm like, yeah. So did loads of us. So did we all. My children will vouch how awful I am very often. You know what I mean? So that isn't the issue. The issue is certain type of personalities are very susceptible to this. And that's why it's not about parenting. This is about a certain type of kid, a certain type of awkward, lonely kid is finding themselves online and falling into it. This is not about the parenting. It's much more about the type of child and the online influence and the kind of perfect storm of a few other things happening. And I really urge the parents not to beat yourselves up. I just think you're being beaten by so many other things and you're being hurt by so many other things. Don't make a villain of yourself. Don't hurt yourself in all this. When I do know every one of us who's a parent could say, I do so many things wrong. It could make your head spin. Yeah. That doesn't mean that this should be happening. That doesn't mean that this is to do with the personality, very, very likely, the personality of your kid and the bounce they got. It might have been bullying, it might have been trauma, it might have been loneliness, and they ended up online or they ended up with influential friends. And that kind of ingredients of the cake came together because of the kind of cultural bounce syndrome that is actually happening as we watch it. And I've seen you speak and write about, Sasha, even the multiple personality disorder. What was it? That was like 100 cases in the whole of history in medical literature. It was really, really unknown. And then you put some kind of eager, kind of maverick therapists and doctors in with a kind of a culture that's ready for it. And suddenly 1 in 20, at one point in the early 1990s, 1 in 20 people were getting diagnosed with multiple personality disorder when they went to therapy. It was crazy. It was wrong. It was inappropriate, and it was a medical scandal. And this is what I believe is happening here.
I've got a load of questions, there's so many questions coming in. It's wonderful. There's lots of questions which fit into the category of how can parents push back against ... So somebody's asked me a question about schools, clinics, therapists, and I kind of want to preemptively reframe that and say not how can parents, but how can Genspect? Because that's what we're here for, right? It's about parents coming together and being supported by clinicians and other interested parties and all doing that. So I just want to move that on to the next thing. You know, there is a change in the air. So what are we going to do? What can we actually do to take this fight on for better care and better information in those settings, in the settings that we all know about, the schools, the therapists, and so forth, the media, of course?
Well, I can answer a little bit about that, and maybe Sasha can answer the specific what should parents do, because I know parents are desperate to know those. But just to answer a little bit about what Genspect can do, we're going to be writing to the papers, we're going to be on the radio, we're going to be on the platforms, basically making the parents' voices heard. And not only that, we can create, you know, what we're hoping to do is create things like graphics that parents can share that will be visually kind of attractive, but will give the message of what testosterone does, or, you know what I mean, the impact of social transition or pronouns or whatever. Things like that, that we can do kind of attractively, and also that we need to get, I suppose, out of the heavy literature and into the graphics and into the visuals, because the heavy literature, they're not reading them, and we know it. We know they're not reading. People who aren't very engaged in this just think, oh yeah, and they go to a slogan and they look away. And we need to get the information. All we need to do is get the information out. We don't actually need to do anything else, because the information is enough. And our job at Genspect is get the information out in attractive, visually kind of attractive and kind of, what is the word? Understandable and relatable. Accessible ways. That's our job. And I think we will be doing it from now on. Tonight is our first night. But Sasha, do you want to answer? Because I know you're all about, I suppose, the psychology of it all and how to help.
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on what you're pushing back against. I mean, just to add my 2 cents on the point you made, Stella, what's really become obvious to me is that there are kind of different buckets of people. There are people who are parents who are already suspicious of this whole thing, and so they're very easy to educate and inform. And then there's the kind of onlooker who has no idea about gender identity. And that might be the school administrator, that might be the well-intentioned teacher who just wants to support kids by using their pronouns. And I think those are the people who really need to be kind of brought up to speed with why are we pushing against the affirmation model? And for the parents here, you know, unfortunately, there are accusations that you guys just don't want to have trans children. And of course, that's ridiculous, and it's a very gaslighting kind of thing. But I think we have to tie together almost like the pathway from affirmation to medicalization, because the activists have done a really successful job of making it seem as though every single step is fully reversible and totally safe, and it's just about exploration. But what we know, according to the data, is that's not true at all. Every step, whether it's pronouns or name change or all of those things, under most circumstances, directly lead into the kind of medical conveyor belt. So I think to speak to the uninformed, well-meaning person, I think that has to be linked together with more clarity, because that's the piece that people are missing. In terms of what parents can do, I mean,
Oh,
I hope you guys can, am I still here?
You're back.
very quickly.
Okay. I know that there have been several parent resource guides created for schools that have even kind of like scripted letters of how to respond to the school's announcement. I think Transgender Trend has one, and in the UK, and then the Kelsey Coalition here in the US has one. And I believe there might be another one in the works, but I'm not 100% sure about that. But those are good resources for parents to take a look at regarding the school. I typically also advise that if there's a particular staff person or a music coach or music teacher or somebody that you have a personal relationship with at the school, try to have a one-on-one meeting with that person and try to educate them, bring them up to speed, bring some information, talk to them about why you're concerned, And that way you might have somebody who's in your corner at the school who can be kind of an advocate on your behalf as well. So if there's somebody in your, I even know that sometimes in churches and synagogues and even religious institutions, they're starting to get on board with the affirmation thing. So try and find somebody that you have the closest relationship with that you can kind of bring into the fold. And of course, if that person is a really radical activist, you're probably not going to win them over. But if you have a strong relationship with somebody at the institution, at the school, at the church, wherever it is, start there. Try and make a human connection. Try and tell the story of why you're concerned, because I think that appeals to people rather than making it a political statement or a political issue. What other kinds of pushing back were in that question, Angus?
Well, there was clinicians. There was also a question I've got so many. They're scrolling past. Somebody mentioned pushing back within political parties, because we do know some of the people who've come into this are political people anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. All sorts of. Yeah, sorry, Stella. Go
Could
on.
I make a point on that? I really do want to say that, like, we all bring something to the party. Some people are brilliant on Twitter, still Tish jumps out at me there. And then some people are brilliant at research. Some people are brilliant at just being the person, talking to the parents at the school gate. You kind of find where you are and find your own way to do it, as opposed to, follow somebody else's way, because there's lots of different ways. I know I was talking to a parent recently and she was saying that, she just kept on saying it quietly to the right people within the school. Like that, you know what I mean? It might be just one or two teachers. You just have to get one or two to see what's going on. And when you see it, you see it. Yeah. That's the thing. You only need to see it. Some people have sent a specific episode of our podcast, or some people have sent Abigail Schreier's Irreversible Damage. There is a lot of content out there. And you did say something earlier, Angus, about the movement. And yes, it has changed. Like in the last year, there was no irreversible damage. The Kira Bell hadn't got, the wings that it did get since the court case and stuff like that. Like, so many things have happened in the last year that there's very definite shifts. And the detransition documentary segment in 60 Minutes, and I know people said it wasn't perfect, but it was detransitioners on US TV. There's been big shifts. There's a huge amount of organizations setting up all the time, like Genspect and others, and we're all kind of getting it together. It is almost it is unrecognizable from when I first went into it, and you literally knew everybody because there was only very few of us. We were this small little group of friends. Now you can't keep up with the content. It's coming faster and faster and faster.
I want to add something onto that. There was a documentary that you guys probably know about called Transmission, Why the Rush to Transition Gender, or something like that.
Yeah.
And my point just escaped me. That's a great example of more attention being brought to the issue. But one of the things they said in that film, which I think they're correct on, is like, when is this going to come to an end? And one of the things, I don't think this is the only thing, because due to statute of limitations, I think it's complicated, at least here in the US, but they said lawsuits, when there are enough lawsuits brought against these doctors, this transitioning of children will come to an end. And what I have observed through IATDD, which is an organization that Stella and I are a part of, the International Association of Therapists for Desisters and Detransitioners, guess who's contacting us?
Yeah.
People who were 14, 15, 16, when they were doing the kind of boom of transitioning kids around 2015, 16, and they're coming into their young adult years now. And many of them are having like that, I call it like the oh shit moment, where they realize what has happened to them. And so it's awful that these young people have been put through this. And I also think as they start to come forward with their stories, the entire narrative of transition always helps people never detransition, all of that is going to be so easily seen through. So I think we're at a very important time right now where the unfortunate kind of the aftermath of this scandal is going to become more and more apparent. And I think 60 Minutes is just a starting point for, I think, what we're going to see coming.
I want to talk a little bit about that because I always remember years ago, and I don't think it's exactly correct, but it is kind of spiritually correct, that, you know, the root of the word education is moving from the darkness into the light. And I feel like we've been in the endarkenment and we're moving into the enlightenment. Like, we have been in a very dark place about this. There's been an awful lot of misinformation, an awful lot of shoddy studies, an awful lot of shoddy treatment of very, you know, engaged, loving parents and their children. And now we're moving into a lighter place where now if you say to a principal in a school, or if you say to somebody in a clinic, hang on a second, can we soften this affirmative approach and widen the narrative a little bit here? Because I think you're being a little bit simplistic. I don't think that they have the right to kind of slam the door. They might be doing it, but I think you will find others now that will start to kind of say, yeah, because people are contacting us, they're contacting Sasha, people are like, clinicians are contacting us at a faster and faster speed. They're contacting us saying, hi, what's going on, basically. You know what I mean? That's the kind of vibe from the clinicians who've just kind of woken up to it. And like I say, when you see it, you see it. It's
Can I jump in and say there's one thing that goes along with that is a few people whose kids have desisted, and they stay in these groups and they stay to help. I don't know if that's something that you're seeing, but I can't imagine a few years ago that there would have been anything to stay in. But we're now seeing people whose kids have desisted and they continue to be part of.
The parents stay.
Yeah, the parents stay. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, the parents staying. The parents of desisting children staying is a very generous thing to do, and I think it's great. I think it can really help us. I'm aware we're coming up to the end of your time there, Sasha. Is there anything you want to say just to finish us off about parental engagement and walking the high wire?
I mean, I'm happy to put together a kind of maybe like a PDF with some of the resources that I've created that might be related to this question. I think finding a balance between having the absolutely sober and appropriate concern about what this might mean, along with an acknowledgement that there is usually an arc to these things. I mean, we've talked about this before, and I think this is really hard for parents to be aware of because they're at one particular moment in time with their young person. Not always, because of course, many of these kids unfortunately do go on to medicalize. But I also know that there tends to be an arc. There tends to be a lot of intensity at the outset where kids are making very rigid demands and they're very intense about their claims. And sometimes with the appropriate kind of bumper lanes in place, we do see that soften. So I imagine I'm speaking with all kinds of parents today, maybe veterans who have kids who have already started a medical process and they're years and years into this, and maybe some other families who are just starting to kind of become aware of their child's gender questioning. But there's a lot of different ways that this can look. So as you attend Genspect meetings and participate in these organizations, keep in mind that you never know exactly what is going to happen with your child, and the next person's story may not be exactly your story.
Thanks, Sasha.
Okay,
thank you for coming.
All right.
So
Good
nice
luck.
to see you.
Yeah.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks very much. Now, people can still, thanks, Sasha. People can still put in questions to Angus as we continue to talk. I do kind of want, as much as possible, Angus, you're more than...
I'm writing them all down. I've had so many, but I am copying them all down and we'll try and get through as many as possible.
Okay, I do want to point out for those of you, you'll be able to see it all on the website, so I'm not going to labor some of this. So that's the Genspect team. They're all fabulous. Pam Buffoni from Canadian Gender Report, phenomenal work that they're doing in Canada. And by the way, I've been reading Helen Joyce's book on trans. It'll be out. I'm giving a review of it for the Evening Standard. It's phenomenal. really well written book. It's going to be a game changer. It's going to be out in about 2 weeks. Helen Joyce, it's called Trans. Here it is here. It's so good, just such a good book. And as she says, this is not a book about trans people. This is a book about trans activists. And off she goes, and she just talks about activism, and your jaw just progressively drops. Anyway, sorry, I got distracted because Canada features quite strong in the book. Kathleen Dooley is amazing. Claire Graham, some of you may have known Claire Graham from MRKH Voice way back in the day for speaking up for DSD families and intersex issues. Dr. Julia Mason, who I see here, is with us. And you're very welcome to speak, Julia, if you want to. And Avi Ring, who I also saw is in our guest list tonight. I saw him somewhere there today and I'm delighted. Very wise man. Marit Runstad. Angus gave me some enunciation lessons on that. That's for Marit, who's a lovely, lovely part of our team and from Norway. And then we put in the anonymous parent, and that's from the world. And we want to say that that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to kind of harness the energy of the amazing parents who've done so much work and have really, really kind of, they do research, they do so much, and they can't come out because they have to stay anonymous because they need to, for their family, for their child who's very distressed and maybe in the biggest challenge of their life. And you're right to stay anonymous. Look after your family first, because it's very important, because it's so difficult. So yeah, then we've got some brilliant advisors. We're very, very lucky to kind of get the cream of the crop with Sasha, the lovely Sasha Roberta, who'll be speaking tomorrow morning. If you want to come back, we're going to have another one in about, I don't know, 8 hours from now. Stephanie Davis-Arai from Transgender Trend, Marcus and Sue Evans, who just released a brilliant book which you can give to clinicians called Gender Dysphoria. Very, very good book, very recommended for any of you who has children going to clinicians and mental health. That's the book to maybe give to them. While I would give the schools Irreversible Damage, I would give the clinicians Marcus and Sue's book. Az Hakim, who is the only person who's consistently ran kind of trans regret clinics in the UK, and he did it for many years. Erin Kimberley, Professor Stephen Levine, one of the greats, Dr. Lisa Littman, Lisa Marciano, Abigail Schar, Sinead, who I did a great interview with Sinead. Well, she did a great interview with me. She's a great talker and she's a brilliant commentator. You'll find her on Twitter. And of course, the brilliant Jane Wheeler, who's a great mind and who's really added an awful lot of depth and intelligence and education to this entire movement. So what will we do? As I said, if you want to ask any questions, maybe Angus, jump in if I'm boring you, but I'm going to just fly through this as fast as I can because I don't want to bore you. I want to show you a little bit about the website, but I do want you to be very aware of what we're going to do. We're going to open up a public dialogue about the complexity of gender and identity development. We're going to highlight the role the media play in guiding vulnerable youth towards a singular explanation for their distress. And they inadvertently steer people down the pathways to lifelong medical intervention. They raised all these stories of trans kids and they inadvertently created a culture. I think a lot of it was inadvertently, certainly the media, and we need to highlight that role they're playing. Lobby politicians, journalists, clinicians and educators to help understand the complexity of identity development. The thing is, all we need to do is get the information out there. All we need to do is that. We don't need to do any more than say, let's look at the good research. Let's look at the in-depth analysis of the research. Let's look beyond the headlines, because actually the truth lies in the depth analysis of any piece of research. And that's what we can do. I see Stephanie Davis-Arai is arriving. So will we get her on to speak if we can in a minute, Angus?
Oh,
so
yeah,
what else
I think so.
Yeah. Ask her first if she doesn't want to. I think I had said it to her during the week and she said she would. So what else will we do? We'll write and ghostwrite articles to appear in the press, articulating parents' concerns and telling parent stories, because stories, when you're driving along and listening to the radio, you turn up the radio when there's a story on. And when there's a loving and engaged parent who's talking about how their child isn't receiving the appropriate medical treatment and how they knew their child was very distressed in the first place, and then their child got lost on the internet and seems to have kind of been beguiled by the idea of the idea that there's a pill and the pill will change your life. It's a very, very unpsychotherapeutic idea that there's an external solution to your problems. And Bob Withers, the psychoanalyst, the Jungian analyst. He says it very well. Do you change the body or do you change the head? Big question, you know. Obviously, people like me will say, well, change the head first if you can at all, because the brain is very plastic and you can do a lot of movement in your brain, a lot more than you can with your body. So we will also book TV and radio interviewers and podcasts so the parents can be heard by the wider public. Going back to the slides there, we're going to create fresh, engaging graphics and animations, presenting the issues of gender questioning young people in an accessible way so that it can be seen by young people and they can kind of engage with it. Because I don't think any content has been given to the teenagers or to the young people, and we need to. We want to broadcast our own exclusive content, giving you a chance to hear from the people making the news in their own words. We're also going to host webinars like this for parents where they can share ideas with some of the world's leading specialists, generate working relationships between parents and clinicians, helping connect the science to the real stories. Unite, this is the thing I'm very into, because I think the loneliness has been dreadful. Unite thousands of parents from hundreds of disparate support groups so that they can speak with one voice, and much, much more. We're open to your ideas. If you've got ideas, get involved. We're going to have a Genspect Parents Forum. The way to stay involved with us more than anything is to press the subscribe button. By subscribing, you're just pressing a button that you'll get some sort of contact from us, maybe an email or a newsletter.
So that's genspect.org, and it's right at the top. You can't miss it. Subscribe. Genspect.org.
Yeah, and like the idea of the subscribe. Do you want to talk a little bit about the subscribe button, Angus?
Yeah, so what we're going to do,
you know?
what we want is for everyone to get in on that and click subscribe, and it will collect just some very basic data, so the name you want to use, an email, and then you can also, assuming you're a parent, you can check the box which says parent, and then we've not only got you in our system, but we've got you in our system as a parent. When the parent forum is up and running, which should be very shortly, we'll send that out to you so you can get yourself in there, and it will be a really useful space to take it beyond the existing support groups that are already going on. We're going to complement that by talking about ways of reaching out beyond and kind of being that front-facing organization. We are representing parents, so we want that kind of feedback. We want you to be able to say, I liked this, I wasn't so keen on this, and have those ideas bouncing around in that space. And then we're also going to be sending out all sorts of stuff. We're writing stories. If you go onto genspect.org, you'll see we're already writing stories, but we're going to have content, lots of different types of content. We're going to have interviews. We're going to have all sorts of stuff. Newsletters going to be coming out. We'll probably be doing something like an email alert for really big stories. So, I mean, we've had a few recently, and there's some more coming up as well. And we would want people to be able to feel that we're a reliable source for these kind of stories and this type of information. And it's a good way of keeping in touch with us and of us being able to ally ourselves with you and represent you.
Yeah. And I think it's very important that people feel represented, and they will do that by going on the parent forum. We're not going to harass you either with the subscription, insofar as when you subscribe, you're not going to get a million emails from us. We're going to be selective, and we understand you're all busy. We understand there's an awful lot of content out there. At the same time, if we can harness the thousands of parents, we are creating a movement, and this is our chance to do it. And I think it's a very important kind of opportunity. About politics and religion, we've written Angus actually wrote a great article. I think it was Angus, wasn't it? Who wrote it about politics of Genspect. And it's really good. I think it's a really good kind of analysis of, yeah, we're a broad church. And if you want to look at how broad a church we are, go to the parents' testimonials. And if somebody is beating you over the head that you're far-right Christian zealots, or whatever they want to beat you over the head with, because I know an awful lot of parents have been misrepresented in their politics. Go and look at the parents' testimonials. You'll see that there's all sorts of different parents from all sorts of different politics, from all sorts of different religions have been hit by this. What's the similarity is the personality types of the kids who've been impacted. It's not the politics or the religion of the parents who are saying, hang on, there's something going on here. My child isn't getting the right treatment, because they're dismissing comorbidities and they're dismissing what seems to be kind of a kind of internalized homophobia of their own. So as it says there, I better go on, will I? We're a non-partisan independent organisation with members hailing across the political spectrum and holding a range of personal beliefs. Our interests relate exclusively to the well-being and safeguarding of children and young people and doesn't extend to party, political or religious allegiance. We welcome people of all faiths and none. So there you go. Everybody, all we're interested in really is whether you're happy with the treatment your children are receiving for their gender issues. Our focus on health will be to campaign for informed decisions that prioritise long-term health, advocate for an evidence-based approach to gender distress, encourage healthcare professionals to evaluate the low evidence base for the current affirmative approach, looking more closely at the harms that medical treatment paths can cause, and also to advocate for better quality research. We're going to be raising awareness of the role of sexuality might play among young people, because I find a huge amount of issues around gender identity would be children, young people. There's a lot of reasons, and it's fascinating, but they're choking their sexual identity, and they're doing it with their gender identity. So gender identity is basically subsuming their sexual identity. I'm seeing it again and again. It's a big issue, and so we need to bring out sexual identity and say something has gone wrong with their sexual identity, and as a result they're repressing it. It's Freudian almost, you know. So the high occurrence of comorbidities needs a huge amount of awareness, massive amount of autism and ADHD and OCD and anxiety in the GDSN meetings. The stats were phenomenal with the numbers of that. The impact of trauma on identity formation, the lack of high quality peer-reviewed evidence for the current treatment path for gender questioning young people, and also will be raising awareness of the significant risks of medical interventions that will impact. The significant risks, like not only, you know, I only heard yesterday a kid being told you'll be taking a pill every day for the rest of your life and there'll be no side effects. And these are kids who just think, okay, great, pill every day and then I'll be fabulous. Great, okay, where do I sign up? So our focus is on education as well as health. We want to see all the education establishments hold neutral space for students so that they can explore their gender, sexual orientation and identity. And they're the three focus. There's a gender identity, there's a sexual orientation, and there's also just an identity formation. We value supportive environments for students so they feel neither encouraged nor discouraged to follow certain paths. Recognize the need for young people to be free to explore all aspects of their gender, their sexual orientation and identity formation. Maybe not to the extremities, but certainly to the kind of to the reasonable extremities maybe. We encourage education establishments to maintain an open and supportive environment based on the principles of informed safeguarding. And we're aware that safeguarding isn't really a concept that has gone over to the States yet, but we're worldwide, and in UK and Ireland and Europe, safeguarding is a big word. And it's really important that we start using it so that we can make sure that people are aware that safeguarding really matters and that people can start using it. So what we believe, we're coming towards the end of this. I know that
I just jump in really quickly
boring,
and say,
everybody?
no, we've thought an awful lot about this, and these positions, you know, not everyone. So in some cases you get one person who thinks one thing, another, and this is really a very collegiate effort. It is really us coming together and trying to get to the best outcome that we can.
Yes.
I just want to put in a word there for all of the people who've contributed, because there's so many people have come into this from so many different angles.
Because you can't please all the people all the time. So you've got to, there's a great line in AA, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous, take what you need and leave the rest. You know, you got to take the best of us, if you follow me, because it's a big movement with an awful lot of different opinions, an awful lot of different politics. And for us to get one point across the line, which is young people are receiving an inappropriate medical treatment. That's the one thing we want to get off the ground. Everything else is all debatable and very, very interesting, frankly. But that's one thing that's kind of just not debatable, and we need to get it out. We need to get that out by being loud. So we wish to help create a society that supports gender nonconformity without requiring the heavy burden of lifelong medical treatment. In this fast-paced world, we advocate for a slower, more thoughtful approach to any difficulties that children and young people face. And we favour a biopsychosocial approach that includes the holistic view of the individual. So you look at everything that's going on. You look at the bullying, you look at the trauma, you look at the eating disorder, you look at the autism and the gender. And none have pride of place. They're all interesting factors in the child's distress. And to us, that's the only way to address kind of a deeply troubled child. So gender is a culturally variable set of behavior and personality expectations applied to sex bodies. God, you could do, excuse me, you could do a whole webinar on what is gender. So that was our that was our version. Gender is fluid. That's what I'll say. We believe this is a really good point, I think, that was well enunciated. I think Angus or somebody came up with this one. We believe that there are many routes that may lead to the development of distress about an individual's gender. Equally, there are just as many routes out of such distress. There's many routes in and there's many routes out. There is no one size fits all. And we don't believe that the affirmative approach is going to fit all. I think it actually needs a more in-depth approach for most children, if not all. I certainly think we affirm the child's distress. We affirm what they believe. We affirm that they are in deep trouble and that they're very extraordinary transfixed with gender. That doesn't mean we affirm and we confirm and we concretize everything they say. That's not our job. Our job as adults and as therapists is much more about making sure you hold space so the child is free to make all sorts of decisions without being channeled or corralled into one direction, because they're young and they have to be free to kind of go lots of different ways as they're finding themselves. We seek a wider range of treatment options, a more evidence-based approach for gender questioning children and young people. So our position about identity formation is, we appreciate that identity formation is an important psychosocial stage of development for youths from pubescence to early adulthood, and this can present as an identity crisis. And you'll find all of this on our website. If you look up our position, there's a lot of information in that part of the website for anything, genspect.org, as I'm sure you know by now. We believe that a change in identity can sometimes seem like a concrete resolution of a trauma, leading young people into the mistaken belief that they can leave their old selves behind them. It's so alluring. You can be somebody different. Take this pill and you don't have to be you. You can be somebody different. Almost the most alluring concept I've ever heard of. And they're young, they're impressionable, they're in pain, and they need a hand. And they don't need to be given simplistic solutions that turn out to be very complicated, very difficult to transition, to medically transition is a very, very difficult road to take. So our position on the age of medical transition, we're in favor of the rights of mature adults to make their own informed decisions. We're focusing on children and young people. That's our focus, because that's what compelled us to get the parents' voices together, because we believe the real tragedy, I suppose, is the focus on the younger children. We want to raise the bar on informed consent. Informed should mean informed. It's not, it's shoddy, and it's something that we would like to, we're not the only people who want to raise that particular bar. The current state of the research indicates that most people do not fully mature until their mid-20s. Around about 25, the brain forms as such in terms of neuroscience, in terms of cognitive function and the development of the personality. For this reason, we have grave qualms about anybody below this age making the decision to transition. We also believe those classed as vulnerable adults may even take longer to develop a stable social and sexual identity. Vulnerable adults are a whole class in themselves that need protection, and that goes back to informed consent, and informed needs to be informed. We're fully against puberty blockers in Genspect for the following reasons. They're an experimental treatment program. They're drugs that can make irreversible changes to young bodies. There's no country in which they've been licensed to treat children with gender dysphoria, and they block sexual development, sexual desire, organ growth, and cognitive function. And that it doesn't even cover the unknown long-term effects we are yet to understand. And so we're very aware that science, we're not science. You know, I'm a psychotherapist. Genspect is made up out of parents, and there are a lot of brilliant clinicians who will advise us if we need to get some advice. But our focus is getting the basic information out in an accessible way. The researchers are going to do the dotting the I's and the perfect research, and they're in the process of it, and it's brilliant that they're doing it, and I'm really glad they're doing it. Our job is to get a more accessible, and I sometimes think that very deep research is kind of being lost because it's too hard to penetrate, it's too wordy, and it's too difficult, and we're going to be creating more accessible content, really. So our position on children, we're coming to the end, you'll be happy to hear of this presentation. We do not believe children or young people are equipped to make lifelong decisions about medical transition procedures. Simple as that. Adolescence and young adulthood is a key developmental stage during which identity is evolving. We believe that young people should be encouraged to accept and to love their bodies. We do, however, support the rights of mature adults to make informed health choices regarding medical decisions. And that's the position we've chosen to take, and that's the position we will stick with. Our position on sexuality, we wholeheartedly support the rights of lesbian, gay and bi people, and we're proud to include many lesbian, gay and bi members and supporters. I'm sure people won't mind.
Right.
Yeah, that would be Angus and many more, but obviously me and Angus are working very hard on this webinar, so even the small little team of 2 is diverse. We abhor bigotry and homophobia and have a zero tolerance policy towards such forms of discrimination. We acknowledge that lesbian, gay and bi youth are often gender non-conforming, and rather than suppressing sexual urges with medication, we support an approach that allows adolescents to explore their sexuality with freedom and acceptance. I think it's a key point, not only around puberty blockers, but around a lot of the medication children are taking. Their sexuality seems to be very consumed and subsumed. We value open and honest discussion between members of the trans community and others to ensure that strongly held beliefs about sex and gender do not overpower one another. So that's our position on that. Like, one is no important than the other. We've no prejudice against trans people in any way. 2 of the Genspect advisors transitioned and 1 remains a trans man. Contentious issues should be worked through respectfully. So long as that condition is met, we welcome contributions from trans people. And some people think we should change our bodies. Others think we should change our minds. Both viewpoints have their merits, and discussion between the 2 should be possible. And that's what kept me in. I think Sasha spoke about that earlier on, about how so many people, like I say, I'm a generalist. I'm into general mental health. I'm interested in all sorts of mental health. But what got me here to the point that I'm part of Genspect and I'm really pushing this is the fact that discussion has been silenced. And I can't bear it. I can't bear the fact that people are in pain and need help, and the real truth isn't coming out. Now it's starting to come out with all the organizations, with Genspect. So how do you support us in this fabulous movement that we are in? Follow us at Genspect on Twitter, at Genspect on Facebook, Genspect International on Instagram. Help us with the national and local media contacts, especially the local media and the national contacts. You contact Genspect and say, I happen to know the guy who runs the radio. I think the radio is underused, by the way, by our movement and also with the newspapers. Please join the Genspect Parents Forum, because we'll be launching that in a while. I'd say in a couple of weeks or so.
And if you want to join that, go to the website genspect.org and subscribe, and we will tell you how to do that. Yeah.
Make a donation. Obviously, we've got some fabulous plans about animation and about graphics, and it'll cost money, but I think it'll be worth it, because I think we've missed it so far as a movement. We've relied on and we're kind of, it's nice that we're such a wordy movement and very long essays, and we've got loads of them. But I do think we need to get some sort of more relatable, accessible, quick content out there, and we want to do that, and that's what a lot of the donation. Not only that, there's an awful lot of work being done by the likes of myself and Angus to get out to the newspapers and things like that. There's a lot of things we're going to be ready to do. As it says, if you're ready to speak out, email alex@genspect.org. You'll see all that on the website. More than anything, subscribe so that we can be part of a movement. If we can get thousands of subscriptions, then we can speak very strongly to the media. We can only do that if you join in and help us out. And already it was amazing. We just started the Twitter. Was it even 24 hours ago?
It was about 24 hours ago, maybe.
Was it? Yeah. And there's nearly 1,000 followers on Twitter. I don't know, it was 900 the last I looked, or something like that. So follow us, subscribe, whatever else. I think we've come to the end, have we?
We have. I mean, so I would like to give people a quick look at the website.
Does anybody want to come on and talk? Does Stephanie want to come on and talk, maybe, or anybody?
Or Tish?
Just unmute and speak out. Maybe put your. I'll put on maybe. Hey, Stephanie, you will speak. Yay, the one and only. When did you first start getting into this, Stephanie? I was trying to think before you came on.
I just want to say congratulations, really. This is amazing. And to have a real global parents forum, it's so fantastic. I know how much work it is. So yes. Thank you. Really big thanks to you for launching what is a really big project. It's worldwide. It's, you know, really, really fantastic. So yeah, it was 2015. I feel even then I was too late for parents who, I mean, that's when I got the website together. I'd been working on that for a year, yeah, obviously, but even then parents were taking children to mental health professionals and their children were just being affirmed. So even back in 2015, but it was a very, very different environment then. You literally nobody was speaking out. You know, there was no other parent, you know, because I work with parents and teachers, and there was no sort of child charity or parenting website or parenting advice group or parenting experts who were mentioning this at all. And in fact, in that world, it's still the elephant in the room. It's not mentioned. And normally anything new that's happening with children is discussed and debated, and nobody was doing it. So, which is why I thought I had a responsibility. But I've seen this, you know, growth of parent support groups and women's groups, grassroots organisations springing up. And I think it gets stronger and stronger. And I'm a firm believer in parents, in parent power. And I know that it's especially difficult for parents of trans-identifying children to speak out, which is why they need spokespeople to do that job for representing them, because, you know, the relationship with your own child is the most important thing. So I'll shut up now and just say really, really congratulations. This is fantastic.
Don't you win out the Genspect Awards. If we have Genspect Awards, we'll have to put you in number one there, because as far as I know, was it you and Fourth Wave Now were the first groups, or am I know I wasn't involved because it was 2017 before I got my head turned.
Fourth Wave was first. We both launched in 2015, but I think Fourth Wave Now was around March, and I didn't get the site up until November, I think it was.
And did you know each other? I presume.
We did, because I wrote in this was, I think it was in March 2015. I wrote a piece called "Is My Child Transgender" on my parenting blog. So I wrote a weekly parenting blog at that time, and the fallout from that was incredible. I lost friends. But also, Denise from Fourth Wave Now contacted me because she could not believe that an article had gone out that was challenging things. It was so rare to see anything, because I think feminists at that time were getting articles, you know, they were sort of being cancelled at that, you know, at that time they were writing articles and then they would be refused publication.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so she contacted me then. So I've known her all of these years.
Yeah, I remember when I first got involved. And it's funny, I got involved because I wrote an article in 2017, the same as you, just kind of going, wow, what's going on here? Like, you know, something to say. Whoa, little did either of us know one article would get us so involved in something. But once you're in, it's very hard to come out, because it reminds me of, I remember a story, it's a funny story, but it's a true story, of a friend of mine who was a student, and he was a very hippy dippy student. I think I told you this, Stephanie, earlier in the week, but anyway, I'll say it again because it's interesting. And he was traveling around Africa for his summer holidays during his college degree. And he kind of accidentally ended up in Ethiopia, and it was 1984. And I was like, what did you do? And he said, well, what could I do? You know, you just roll up your hands and you start helping. And he spent the next 2 years in Ethiopia, and it shaped his entire life, because there he was, hippie, and suddenly, whoa, what is going on here? This is extraordinary. And I kind of feel similar, myself and yourself and whoever else, I'm sure Lisa Lippman and all the other people, that you fall in and you go, wow, you can't look away from this. It's dishonorable to pretend that this isn't something that needs a lot of help, because people are speaking the truth and being silenced, and some appalling tragedies are happening in this, you know, it really has been. Would anybody else like to speak, or any questions for Stephanie or something? Or do you want to show the website? I'm sure you're dying to show the website. But
I want to show the website, but I also want to say it's just so wonderful to have Stephanie with us, and thank you very much for coming. It's such a pleasure. Will I show the website?
Yeah, and if anybody
I'm
wants,
not going to go through it for too long, but I'll just
maybe let yourself be known by raising your hands, or else sending a message to Angus.
So this is our website. So you can see up here the subscribe button that's how you sign up, and there's links to the Twitter and the Facebook and the Instagram, and you can search. The search function is actually very good, I have to say, because I lost track of what I was doing and then actually had to search the website I had just built in order to find something, and could find it. These are the stories that we've written. There's a link there, another way to subscribe, another way is to follow us. These are sort of, I'm going to run through this because also I really want you to go and look at it. So I almost want to go too fast. These are our focus areas. This is sort of what we're here for. We're not just speaking for a few, we're speaking for thousands, and we want to provide a platform for a more honest and open conversation.
Yeah.
That is what's so important to us. There's a link down here to the testimonials I'm going to show you in a bit. Now I'll come on to the team. This is our wonderful team. So we've got Stella, Pam, Kathleen, Claire, Julia, Avi, Marriage, the anonymous parent. All of these wonderful advisors that Stella went through are on the PowerPoint. So I'm just going to rush through these. There's little me at the bottom with our press team, which is Mary and Alex. Little me.
My favorite part, just so you know, is this one, the testimonials. Press it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think this is really powerful. I really do.
So you come in here and you can see, so we've got desisters on there as well, who are in blue. Now we're not hoping, I mean, honestly, if we put every story on, there wouldn't be a map, there would just be circles. It would look like measles, right? Because there are so many people going through this, but it's a great kind of range of stories showing what's going on, and you can see the different parts of the world where this is going on, and then you can jump down and read these people's stories, and some of them chose to share with us their political affiliation, or in some cases they put in their religious affiliation as well. So you can see a lapsed Catholic here in Galway, and people just in their own words, and it's very, very
powerful. Can I just say, you know, what's lovely about that is that horrible representation of parents is kind of the kibosh is put on that when you start looking at all the parents and you realize actually this is just loads of different parents from loads of different backgrounds. And you know what, the commonality, as I said earlier, is their kids is the commonality. Lost, lonely kids ending up on websites, ending up being influenced by people and thinking that there's a simple solution to complex problems. And you know what I mean? So anybody, thanks for the scrolling and all that, but like, yeah, anybody who's trying to kind of hit you over the head and say, you know, the right-wing Christian zealot is a big one that annoys me. And funnily enough, from Ireland, our position is very good as well. That's my second favorite in this website, and I think it's other people's favorite. But I just want to say about, you know, the way the Americans are being tarred with the Prussians are told right-wing Christian zealots and far right and alt-right and extreme right and whatever. In Ireland, I got told I was a West Brit, because in Ireland, it's a bad thing to be called a West Brit, which means basically I'm pretending to be English, which is kind of hilarious because I'm an Irish speaker and I'm probably the most Irish person you'll ever meet. I speak Irish.
I would like to second that.
I'm over the top Irish. So it was a real sign that they would throw anything at you, because anybody who knows me would say, you could call her anything, but you couldn't call her a West Brit. And that was what was thrown at me. And it was thrown at me very, very, very heavily. And I just thought, well, I'm so comfortable with that particular slur, because not that the West Brit does not mean Brit. It means as in your West, as in your Ireland. It just means you're Irish pretending to be English. And it's a particular kind of, as if you're trying to be posh or something like that. That's the kind of vibe, because English are posh and Irish aren't. And yeah, it was just a real representation of God, they'll throw anything at you, even if it's comically untrue. Anyway, yeah, this position, you work away, Angus, I'm talking too much.
Yeah, so lots of people have been, I mean, this is the culmination of many, many months of lots of different people's viewpoints coming in and thrashing out all of these issues. This is really a very good guide to all of these different things. So we're talking about sexuality, we're talking about why would we use one word instead of a word? that might be more common. What's our position on medical transition? How does that square with the idea of discrimination? What are puberty blockers? In a bit more detail, what is the Dutch protocol? So you can really go in and see, well, what are they actually saying? What is guiding their thinking on all of this? And you can see that it's all very well thought out, because it's the culmination, as I say, of not just an awful lot of work in time terms, but lots of different people coming in and reaching these positions by arguing out the issues together. So this is a great, and you can see there's a lot in there. So have a look through that. We've got some resources here. And now a lot of this you've seen already in the presentation. So we're kind of pulling in these parent support groups that you've got. We've got other helpful organizations. So we've got the wonderful, just for an example, just pulling it out of nowhere here, Transgender Trend. We've got useful links as well, that we've got books, articles. This one's very good, I hear.
Oh yeah, I forgot to say, everybody,
mine.
for those of you who don't know Angus wrote the series of, you didn't say that earlier, he wrote the series on series of articles in the webinar, or in Quillette. In
Quillette, When Sons Become Daughters.
That's it, yeah.
And the last one's up there. I think it's still up there on their header, actually, but get over there quickly. Loads and loads of stuff. And so you can go through all of these. And now this is the stories. So these, you can just kind of scroll through our stories. These are showcased on the front page. And we're putting a lot of effort into making sure that we're covering things. So this is an essay I wrote about the politics and trying to be really brutal about it and say, look, there are extremes. There is an extreme, we call it maybe the woke left, for want of a better term, who just aren't really reasonable. There's an extreme right. They're not really reasonable. We're not in the market for them, but we'll talk to anyone in the middle, and that's quite a lot of people. Great pieces from Mary, who's the head of the press team, on the 60 Minutes piece and on all sorts of stuff.
Okay.
And then, yeah, contact us. If you want to contact us, here's how you get in touch. You can email the press team, or you can email any other inquiries. And the subscribe, can't come back to it enough. Subscribe.
Thank you.
That's the website. So yeah, genspect.org.
Does anybody want to, we're coming towards the end, does anybody want to speak? Thanks a million to Angus, and his work on this website has been phenomenal, and he's been so good-natured about me going, what about this? And I'm so stupid when it comes to technical things. So sometimes I'm talking about like email and I should be talking about website. Like, I'm pretty basic.
At the end of the decade, you'll know what a cookie is. You'll be able to define a cookie.
Oh, I won't. But does anybody want to speak? Because we've come towards the end, only if you want to. And maybe will I press the end of the recording so that people can speak a little bit, maybe more freely? Yeah, I will.